know what really makes us mad is wasting money on CDs with only one or two good songs.
Yeah. Tell them about punk.
What's up, posers? Welcome to Punk Lotto Pod. I'm your co-host, Justin Hensley.
I'm your other co-host, Dylan Hensley.
And this is the show where we choose 1 year at random and select one punk, hardcore, emo, or punk-adjacent album from that year to discuss. Head over to patreon.com/punklotopod to get access to all of our weekly bonus audio. For $1, it gets you last week's bonus audio, where we did an I'm Listening, where we talked about the albums we listened to over the last month. Pretty heavy on newer records. We're getting to that time of year where if you have stuff you've been meaning to check out, it's probably time to check it out or to go back to records that you think might wind up, being on your best of part of the list. So mine was very heavy on 2024 releases. And I think yours, you had a pretty decent amount of 2024 picks as well, too. So
I had a few records to talk about.
Yeah. You can also check out the newest episode of Challengeography on my Joan Jett series. I did part 3. That will be taking a pause until the new year, because once we hit, I'm going to say the last week of November, I'm going to start my best of lists. So I will start off with the biggest disappointments of 2024 and then move on to the formats. So best demos, best splits, best singles, and then I'll do best EPs of probably the first week of January as well, to correspond with our album of the year episodes as those start to come out on the main feed. So be on the lookout for that. You're going to get a lot of audio in December. Keep on the lookout for that. You can sign up for our $5 tier, which is our producer/listening club tier. And we haven't nailed down a date yet. We might wind up doing it the first week of December. We have to just see. If you want updates on that, check out our Patreon. I'll update it as soon as we land on a date. And we'll also talk about it in our Discord channel. So the Punk Lotto Pod Discord channel. I think we're going to talk about Swingin' Utters, a juvenile product of the working class. So yeah, listen to that album, join at the $5 tier, and come talk on a Zoom chat, or a Skype chat, actually, with me and Dylan and whoever decides to show up in our producer tier. So we had fun in the last 2 of those. So definitely looking forward to add more people to that. And as a producer, you get your name and whatever it is you are trying to promote said on the show. So we'll do that in a little bit as well. Or you can sign up for our $10 tier, where you choose the album we devote an entire episode to. One-time $10 donation. You choose the album. We talk about it on the show. We got one of those coming up shortly as well. So plenty of content going around at patreon.com/punklotopod. So this week's episode, it was your turn to select the album for us to discuss. And I gave you the year 2003. And before we get into the album you actually selected, what were you considering for us to talk about?
All right. So I considered the decline of British Sea Power by the band previously known as British Sea Power, now known as Sea Power.
Mm-hmm.
I can't say the name Sea Power without thinking of Sea Parks. So I always think of A Fire at Sea Parks from the IT Crowd. A show that I now prefer to just let live in my memory. I think the last time I revisited it, I was like, there's still a lot of really funny stuff, but it doesn't quite hold up.
Yeah, and then, the showrunner.
And the showrunner being a, transphobe,
yep,
really kind of ruins the legacy of it.
Yeah.
But the legacy of the decline of the British Sea Power holds strong and is shining bright. I really enjoyed that record. I really like those first few British Sea Power records. I think they did such a cool take on like post Britpop, post punk revival. It's like if Interpol was fun. Yeah, I don't know. They're an interesting band. That record is noisier based on what I've heard from it recently. It's noisier than I thought it was or expected it to be. It's a little harder than I expected it to be. It's definitely one that is on my radar to listen to and talk about from time to time, sometime next year probably, because 2003 is one of those, is going to share a calendar with 2025. So I will be deep diving 2003 next year, and I've already kind of started doing it this year, because I did talk about a couple of 2003 records on the I'm Listening we just recorded.
You remember when you said that you were going to try and like shake this thing? and you are clearly not shaking it. You were planning next year's calendar.
I have next year's mostly figured out. Yeah, there's definitely like tons of records that I know correspond with the calendar from next year. I don't know. I need to come up with some other wrinkles to my listening systems, but next year I have a lot more years to choose from. This year I had like 2 years to choose from, so it was like, well, I'm out of 68 records this month that I want to listen to, and 96 records are not doing a lot for me either. So yeah, this British Sea Power record was already kind of on my radar. That's why it was one of the ones that jumped out to me to consider talking about. I figured that might be, is that the one? Is that the Sea Power record to do?
I don't know, because if you look at the most popular releases on Sea Power's Spotify page, it's Disco Elysium, which I think is a soundtrack to a video game.
Well, that doesn't count.
And From the Sea to the Land Beyond, which is the soundtrack to a documentary. So their top 2 releases are soundtracks, and then their 2017 and 2022 albums.
Of their proper records, the highest number of ratings is the first record with 2,700 ratings, and it's like cut it in half for open season. And do you like rock music? I would say the first one's probably the one to do, but any one of the first 3 might be fair game. I think that's anything when they were later,
at their peak in popularity is probably that. They've reissued The Decline like 2 different times. So though they've also reissued Open Season, and they just did the 15th anniversary of Do You Like Rock Music this year. So they're also really good about just reissuing their stuff and, keeping the legacy alive. God, I wish they'd come to the US. I don't know if they will. They haven't been here in years, since before the pandemic. I think Machineries of Joy was the last time they were here, and that was, God, what year was that record? 2013? Oh, yeah. They're never coming back.
I considered, right now, You're in the Best of Hands, and if something isn't quite right, your doctor will know in a hurry, by Bear vs. Shark, because it's an all-time great record, and it rules, and I could talk about either Bear vs. Shark record. I think they're great, and always enjoy revisiting their records. We've never really done them properly on the show. We've never devoted an entire episode to Bear vs. Shark, so that was a very strong contender. I figured that would be an easy one to talk about and probably have a fair amount to say about it.
Yeah, this wasn't the thing, but Bear vs. Shark announced a couple new shirts. Like, they put out 2 new shirts, and they're good looking shirts. They're Mark Paffey style, designs, like the kind of stuff you've seen on like the reissues that they did a few years ago. But I think I told you, I was like, I just want to see them live at this point more than anything.
Yeah,
and it's shocking that the Fest can't get them to play. I know they've been asked to do it since they reunited, and they've not been able to get them lined up. They also don't really play outside of Michigan very often.
I know they said that they don't want to play outside of Michigan.
Is it because they were tour machines for like a decade and then got nowhere?
Yeah, they can't really. I mean, I don't know what the rest of the members. I mean, they all have kids and jobs, so I'm sure they're just like, we're not going to tour a ton. Like, they did a little bit of touring recently. They just didn't come anywhere near us.
Yeah.
Or at least, like, I didn't have the opportunity to see them. Like, I could have gone to LA, but I think it was like the date just wouldn't have worked. Yeah, they said something like they don't want to play any shows outside of Michigan unless it's like for charity.
Oh, okay.
Like,
somebody put together a charity show.
they don't want to travel with the band anymore.
Then why did they do that audio tree?
I could see them just like maybe saying yes to like a festival. So the Fest really should get them, but I don't know why they haven't. They just maybe haven't offered enough money. But I could see them doing Riot. I could see them doing
Chicago's not that far.
Something kind of big, but
yeah,
maybe they'll get a When We Were Young. 2026. We'll see them play for 20 minutes.
My understanding of When We Were Young and Sick New World, they're identical festivals in the sense of how they're run. They're one-day festivals where every band has 20 minutes to play, except for like the top headliners.
It's like rotating stages, right?
Yeah. They apparently, so I learned this listening to the POD cast. They were talking about the new Sick New World lineup and how that festival was originally a like new metal festival, and that this newest lineup is barely a new metal festival. And the understanding is they can't get any of the bands to come back a second time because it's that poorly run. And they're always behind schedule. They're trying to make up time by cutting people, or cutting people's time. And like the only people who do come back are like the top headliners, and they're the ones who are given like way more time and a nice, experience backstage. So
Didn't they just do the When We Were Young? Didn't they cut like the middle of a song on the Used, like mid set?
yeah,
Because
they were behind.
Because they were behind. Because that's the thing is they booked all those bands to do album anniversary or like album sets, and then didn't give them time to play the albums.
Yeah. The fest in Florida, they time those things perfect.
They give some bands too much time.
That is the biggest complaint. Some bands have more time than they need, but at the same time, they never get behind. I've never seen one get behind. So it's like one of
the most behind I've seen anything happen at the fest was the Descendants, because the Descendants were dragging their asses sound checking.
Yeah. That was the only one that ran behind, and I bet they still ended at the same time they're supposed to. They were also the headliners that day, so nobody was after them. I don't think so.
Yeah, I think they could have played for as long as they wanted to play.
City ordinance would have been the thing to cut them off. Yeah. That was Cold Fest. Only one of those ever. Yeah. Anyway, what else?
And I considered Hidden Hands of the Sadist Nation by Darkest Hour, which I've listened to some stuff from that record recently. So sick.
Yeah.
Still holds up. Those couple of Darkest Hour records, they're just fun. They're cool riffs. Can't understand anything he's saying. That record definitely holds up. That would be one of the ones to do. I think there's probably two Darkest Hour records that are like the obvious choice.
Yeah, Hidden Hands and Undoing Ruin are probably like, the big two. I guess if you had to choose another one, So Sedated?
Yeah.
So Secure? Or Deliver Us, maybe. One of those two. Probably So Sedated, but
I feel like historically, So Sedated's more important.
Yeah. Honestly, the Mark of Judas is considered pretty important too. I never got into that record though. It's a little too standard metalcore. It came out in 2000 though, so that could be part of the problem. It's just the genre progressed very fast past that very specific style of riffage. But I think at the time that was considered a really great record for the scene. We'll see. Once my Metalcore Chronicles gets to the year 2000, we got a long ways to go.
I think the reason I was just thinking like this would be fun. I guess maybe like the two reasons that I wouldn't want to do this one, why I ended up not picking that Darkest Hour record, is I was a little concerned that a metalcore record might not yield much conversation, because I find hardcore and metalcore bands, when they're good, to be kind of hard to talk about on the show sometimes if there's not a lot of story. And I don't know how much story there is with Darkest Hour other than they're still together.
Yeah.
And there's been some lineup change, but they're still going. And what's his name? Schliebum has been in like 10 side projects that are all not as good as Darkest Hour. And also it's a Bush era political metalcore record. And we just did the Born Against record. Yeah. I was like, let's not go fully political hardcore this month.
I'm sure the lyrics on the Patriot Virus on that record are probably really specific.
Let's see how specific.
You know what? Let's do this.
Do we get like a Condoleezza Rice?
Oh, you like a like an Against Me, Condoleezza. Let's see. I pulled up the lyrics on Spotify.
No, it's a little more general. Yeah.
Yeah, it does seem like a little bit more standard. Salvation in a Warhead, American.
There's no references to Colin Powell or Donald Rumsfeld.
Yeah. I mean, I'm nostalgic for some of that old political discussion.
You're nostalgic for being radicalized at the age of 13 by the Bush administration.
I'm more nostalgic for like the songs and like writings and movies from that time period that were like critical of all that stuff. That's what I'm more nostalgic of.
Yeah,
Just like that's like, oh, if only you knew what's to come. Terrible.
Well,
Terrible.
maybe they did know what was to come. They were
Yeah.
just dealing with the current threat.
Yeah.
You know.
Previously we have covered the albums Brothers Sisters by North of America. We did that in episode 266 with good friend Corey. At episode 234, I did Guitar Romantic by the Exploding Hearts with good friend Corey. So he got 2003 back to back, which I thought was funny. Episode 199, we discussed In Keeping Secrets of Silent Earth 3 by Coheed and Cambria. Episode 144, we did We're Down Till We're Underground by Give Up the Ghost with the band Easy Prey, who I believe they have called it quits. Episode 114, we did the Meadowlands by the Wrens. We did that with Sam Yield. The Wrens, I think they've talked about that record's finally coming out at some point, or it's closer to coming out than it's ever been. I don't know exactly when. Episode 92, we did the self-titled Black Eyes album with Bakai, who also broke up. Episode 30, we did Our Lady of Annihilation by Most Precious Blood and Simulation Transparency Alienation by Wolves with Grant from Bitter Melody Records. And yeah, that's our oldest episode 30. So yeah, we've hit 2003 a few times. This decade is pretty good. The 2000s is pretty good for options. There's a lot to talk about, and it gives us plenty of, fodder to come back to every time we do. I guess we should do some of the other records that came out in 2003. At least according to Rate Your Music, the number one punk record is Hail to the Thief by Radiohead. Cool. Not a punk band at all.
Cool.
In any way whatsoever. They
Good
have
old
the
Zionist Radiohead.
Yeah.
Whoops.
Oops. We have The Strokes, Room on Fire. Cool. White Stripes, Elephant.
Yeah. We have the Strokes and the White Stripes right next to each other at the top of the chart. That tells you a lot about the time period.
Yeah. The Mars Volta released D-Louse in the Comatorium.
A good record I don't want to listen to or talk about.
Yeah, a guest shall be making us talk about that. Big band, important for people of a certain age, especially these records, like the first 3 records by them. Enjoyable records. I don't know what there is to talk about, but other than the fact that they're weirdos
trying to decipher the lyrics. I mean, that could be the whole angle of the episode. What's he saying?
We have Transatlanticism by Death Cab for Cutie. That's a New Year's record, isn't it? It's like a record that people listen to on New Year's. Yeah, because it starts with the song The New Year.
The New Year. Yeah. It is a good record. I think that record and Plans are good records. Not something I'm like super into. I totally forget that Chris Walla is from Death Cab for Cutie.
Do you think Chris Walla and Chris Wallard would ever do an album together?
The Walla Wallards.
That's it. That's what you call it.
No, probably not.
Or just Chris Wallard fronts Death Cab for a record, and then Chris Walla does a Hot Water Music record.
Yeah, but the main Death Cab singer is Ben.
Yeah.
So
it doesn't work as
Chris
well
just plays
because
guitar.
Yeah, he's not the singer of that band. The joke doesn't work, but
I mean, I would rather hear Chris Wallard sing Title and Registration than Ben Gibbard do. I don't know which Hot Water Music songs Chris sings primarily.
I've been listening to Hot Water Music for so long, and I still can't tell apart who sings what. I think Chris sings more than Chuck does.
Yeah.
And Chuck now you can tell them apart a lot clearer because Chuck has 2 decades of solo material where he learned to sing, quote unquote.
Yeah.
So now it just means he puts vibrato on everything he sings. It's like, you're not actually that good of a singer, but
yeah,
he's
but
got
I can
that.
do this.
Yeah, but I can do this. And Wallard doesn't do the vibrato, so that's how you can tell.
Yeah.
New records apart. Old ones, I still can't tell. Looking at this chart, what is actually punk on here? Blink-182?
Yeah. Well, technically, yes.
Is pop punk, yes.
Blink-182, a band neither of us will ever pick.
God, no. I have no interest in choosing one of their albums.
So if you want us to talk about a Blink-182 record, sign up for the $10 tier on our Patreon. Or come on the show. We'd do it with you.
Yeah.
I'm not going to like it. I'm not even going to try to be nice about it either. So just...
We'll be honest.
Take that into consideration. Same with if you did a Fall Out Boy record.
Yep.
There's one of those in 2003. That's the first one?
I think so. I think it is the first
No,
full length.
It's not.
Jesus. I never know which Fall Out Boy record is which.
They have two in 2003. Evening Out with Your Girlfriend is the first one.
Oh, the one that looks like a MySpace filter, I guess. Like you could have put your photo in the middle of that. Yeah.
2003, I was 13. So a lot of this shit is just really notable to me and recognizable to me because I was paying attention a lot to, punk and alternative music for the next 10 years. I mean, a lot of this stuff I probably wouldn't have been aware of in 2013, but would have become aware of pretty soon after because we weren't quite there yet.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out what I would have been listening to in 2003. Beloved Failure On was in 2003.
Yeah. And that's a record I got. Did I get that in 2003 or did I get that in 2004?
There's a chance you got it a year later.
I probably got it a year later.
Ooh, here's one I was listening to in 2003. Back Again by Disciple. So that kind of gives you an idea of what. Seismic by Dogwood came out that year. That's the one you would have listened to.
I would have purchased The Beautiful Letdown by Switchfoot in 2003. I bought that myself with my own money and listened to it. And, actually, that's probably one of the earliest experiences of me realizing that a record can not live up to expectations.
Yeah.
So I really liked the song, the single from it. Which one is that? Meant to Live?
Yeah.
And bought it on the strength of that and the fact that I just knew who they were because they were a Christian rock band. And then listened to that record. And I think the first listen, I was like, this isn't as good as I thought it was going to be. And I, continued listening to it. You're 13 years old and I would have been 12 when it came out. And you have limited options to choose from. So you just listen to the CDs that you have. And there was enough that I liked about it to make it easier to come back to it. Because it does have that riff. That Meant to Live riff is good.
I mean, it just lived on that riff alone.
Yeah. So it was doing heavy lifting.
Listen to these embarrassing records that I would have purchased in 2003. Five Iron Frenzy, Cheeses of Nazareth.
Yeah.
a compilation of outtakes and silly songs that they made specifically for it. Grand Incredible Gigantic, the OC Supertones side project, Matt Morganski and Ethan Luck, where they're not playing ska, they're just playing kind of punk rock sort of stuff with 3 songs about the Los Angeles Lakers. 3 songs.
The Lakers.
Yes. I also purchased MXPX's Before Everything and After that year. A record I did not like in real time. I was like, ugh, I do not like this. POD's Payable on Death, the follow-up to Satellite, where they added living sacrifice guitarist Jason Truby. That is terrible. Such a bad record. And I think I have, let's see what else if I pull up. See if there's any other embarrassing selections there. Well, I'm not embarrassed by this, but Shadow Zone by Static X. Hell yeah. Love that record. Still love that record. Best record. Yeah. Stuff you would have bought? Relient Cade?
Yeah. I got it. I got them pulled up. Don't worry.
Okay.
I'll run it down. Phenomenon by 1000 Foot Crutch. I believe I got that for Christmas in 2003.
That sounds right. Yeah. When you picked yourself.
Yeah. And that was probably the exact 6 month to a year period where I could enjoy 1000 Foot Crutch.
The new metal that I purchased, that's the end of the run.
Yeah.
For new metal for me personally.
Yeah. Two Lefts Don't Make a Right, but Three Do by Reliant K, which was not which was one that I really liked. It was not as good as The Anatomy of Tongue in Cheek.
Mm-hmm.
Cannot imagine listening to these Reliant K records now. I don't think there's a chance that those hold up.
Bet they don't.
Very low odds. I don't know that I would have gotten this record in 2003. I probably got it in 2004, but Far From Nowhere by Slick Shoes came out that year. That is actually a good record. That's a fun record. It holds up pretty well. Super fast, skate punk. It's mostly just songs about girls.
It was on Side One Dummy.
Yeah. And yeah, okay, so 2003 was a big year for disappointing records for me. I got Worldwide by Audio Adrenaline.
Oh, no.
When that came out. And that one was like, I probably thought to myself at some point within a year of getting it that I was like, I'm not going to buy any more Audio Adrenaline records.
Well, I remember when Lift came out, we were like, I don't think this is like a step backward. Like, we didn't like it as much following Underdog.
Yeah. Yeah. And Worldwide, I was just like, oh, I guess I'm over this now.
Yeah. Going even further in that direction. Okay.
I think that's all. There may be other stuff that I might have had. Looser and Blue put out Tales of the Knife.
Oh,
I mean, we could just go down the Christian rock charts because all of this shit is like extremely familiar to us.
Yeah.
A good one, I will say, The Light of Things Hoped For by Brave Saint Saturn came out that year. And The Last 5 Iron Frenzy and Is Near.
Yeah, I think
which was
we
like
didn't
the
get
tour version of it. That
Yeah, we didn't
get it until they did the live album packaged with it the next year, deluxe edition.
Yeah, it was like originally on the last album was originally sold at the merch table. And I mean, I'm glad I didn't. I mean, I would have liked to have seen 5 Iron back then in real time. That would have been fun to see. But also, I would have been annoyed to have to buy like the special edition later. So glad to have that. But we fell for buying the special edition a year later. A lot more in the coming years. That would be more of a metalcore thing for us.
Yeah. Oh, I got one extra song.
All right. It was worth paying more for it the second time.
Now it's got a cardboard sleeve on it.
Yeah. And a backstage DVD.
Yeah.
Thanks, Haze Today.
Yeah. 2003. There's a lot of stuff that we could keep going and talking about stuff that came out that year, but I will talk about probably a lot of this stuff next year.
Revisiting
on Patreon as I'm hitting a lot of this stuff. I'm in my calendar project that's been going for a long time. I've primarily been interested in like 60s, 70s, a little bit of 80s stuff because a lot more of it has been like kind of unfamiliar territory for me. And a lot of the later years that I've hit haven't been as interesting. Like 2005 was like kind of interesting, but I've been getting more like early 90s. And so like, I'll hit the classic stuff that I know, but like I was kind of looking ahead and I was like, 2 of the years that I'm gonna have to choose from to listen to are 97 and 2003. And both of those years have a lot of stuff that I enjoy, that I like to revisit. So I think I'll have fun with the more recent years to choose from. I mean, the classic stuff, older stuff, I'll continue to deep dive with too, but you'll get more of the 97 and 03 stuff on the Patreon. I'm listenings. So
yeah,
if you want to hear me talk about 2003, I will.
Yeah, you got a whole year of it coming
because there's a lot of it. I mean, I can go pretty far on these charts of just having stuff jump out where I'm like, oh, I know that record. I know that record. I know that one. I want to listen to that one.
I could do that trick where I go to the last page to see if there's something on there that I recognize. And since I'm the sicko who pays for the extended charts, let's see. On page 38, do we have anything that I've even heard of? The name Street Brats actually sounds familiar to me. And I don't know if I'm just thinking like lower class brats.
Maybe.
But they're on here. Frontiera. I have heard of that name. Don't know the album, but.
On page 25, there's definitely stuff I recognize, like Genital Grinder.
Yeah.
And The Banner.
Why are the banner way back there?
It must be a really early one, but not much that I actually want to listen to.
Hey, there's an Armchair Martian record out there. That is that's John Snodgrass. His band. Very all sounding.
There's a St. Catherine's record on page 24, which I think good friend Corey described to me as no one's favorite band. Like too long lived to be no one's favorite band was maybe how he described it.
Very much in the grab ass Charleston school of punks.
Yeah. We got a Valiant Thor record back here.
Woof. Which one?
Stranded on Earth. It's probably the first one.
Yeah, I don't think I know that one. That's where they came up with the lore on that one. Oh, okay. Yeah, we should stop because we could go forever on 2003. Yeah. That would be. We've probably done the charts on that one before, but I've considered maybe we should just redo some charts. But
we could. We'll see.
Yeah. Let's get into this actual good record that we're going to be talking about. Not to tip the hand of our thoughts on this record, but
you saw the name of the episode. You know what we're talking about. If you've listened to this show before, you know our feelings.
Before we get into the album, though, we need to shout out our producers. So shout out to Dave Brown, host of the podcast One Band, Five Songs, and writer of the blog Oklahoma Lefty. Shout out to Steve Long, host of the podcast Rebel Rock Radio. Jason W., writer of the newsletter Songs About Chocolate and Girls, as well as the host of the podcast 1,000 Plays or Less. And Phillips Booker, who sponsored our 10-yard fight episode a while back. So thank you all producers. Thank you so much. And if you would like your name added to that list, sign up for our $5 producer/listening club tier. So today we are talking about Reconstruction Site by the Weakerthans.
I wanna call requests through heating vents and hear them answered with a whisper no. To crack the code of muscle slack and tense, let every second step in boots on snow. Complete your name with accents I can't place, that stumble where the syllables combine. Take depositions from a stranger's face, paint every insignificance a sign. So tell me nothing matters less or more. Say whatever we think actions are. We'll never know what anything was for. If near is just as far away as far, and I'm permitted one act I can say, I choose to sit here next to you and wave.
Stats on the band to get going. From Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. They formed in 1997. This album was released August 26th, 2003 on Epitaph Records. This is the band's third studio album. And the personnel on this record is John Paul Sutton on bass and vocals, Jason Tate on drums, percussion, vibraphone, glockenspiel, keys. They could have just said percussion in the liner notes. We didn't need all the other instruments, but whatever. Stephen Carroll on guitar and vocals, lap steel guitar, pedal steel guitar, keys and piano, and John K. Sampson on guitar and vocals. The album was produced by Ian Blurton, who produced all of the Weakerthans albums, and produced 2 by the band Cursed, and Songs About Burning Lovers by Burning Love. So, Callahan and the Weakerthans.
Are Cursed from Manitoba too?
No, Cursed were from Ottawa.
They're from Ottawa, yeah.
Toronto band, I think.
Yeah.
Yep. So, additional musicians, we have Rusty Mattis on trumpet, Christine Fellows on piano, and Sarah Harmer on vocals. And we'll get into more of the backstory a little bit later. So, what made you choose the Weakerthans?
I think I said it's seasonally appropriate. I think that was the deciding factor. I was pretty close on all of them. They were all pretty strong considerations. So ultimately, I was just like, that'll be easy to do and probably easy to talk about.
You said seasonally appropriate, and I instantly agreed with you. This time of year, I listen to the Weakerthans probably more than any other time of the year. There's something wistful about this time of year for me. I am mostly nostalgic during this time period too. This is when my nostalgia kicks into overdrive. And I don't know if that's just because like this time of year is so closely tied to like, Halloween, Christmas, Thanksgiving, and like usually your fondest memories of those holidays tend to be around when you're a child. So I guess that could be part of it. I don't know that other people think of Weakerthans in the same way that we do, but yeah, there's just something about this band that just feels right. Walking through the leaves in.
Yeah.
So I guess
I think
Walking Through
people
the Snow
generally
is appropriate too.
I think people generally describe the Weakerthans as a fall and winter band. It just feels right. But also, so like the other big thing was like of the bands that I was considering talking about, this was the most important one that we haven't really properly done on the show. Because we did a John Kay record before, but we've never done a Weakerthans record. And when we did that John Kay, so much of the conversation was just about the Weakerthans. So I was just like, we should just do the Weakerthans. We should talk about the Weakerthans and do one of their records because that's why you're listening to a John Kay record.
Yeah, because you like the Weakerthans.
So yeah, it just felt it was seasonally appropriate, and I figured there'd be enough to say about it. So,
do you remember how you got into the Weakerthans? I feel like it's probably similar to me, but
I think you introduced them to me. So the earliest I remember, I remember listening to Fallow in your car.
Maybe it makes more sense to start with me then, because I remember the first time ever hearing the Weakerthans was on the Hopelessly Devoted to You compilation.
Okay. It was the Hopeless comp. I was like, that doesn't seem right. Would it be Hopeless? But yeah.
Yeah, because they were on Sub City Records, which was like a sub label of Hopeless, I believe. Yeah, because they put out
the first record? No, Sub City was Left and Leaving. Okay.
Yeah, Left and Leaving was on Sub City. Yeah. I think Fallow was distributed through Sub City as well later.
Yeah.
Because technically Left and Leaving is also on G7.
Yeah.
But in the US, that's the one that got the most attention there.
And like,
so I would have heard it on
vinyl. Yeah.
There's like, I think there were 2 songs, I believe, on the comp. It was a two disc comp. One was like the bands of the last, decade. And then the other was like the newer bands. So like your all time lows. Whereas the other one had your Sam I Ams and D4s. Like, oh, this is the dividing line, isn't it? The label went from being cool to chasing trends. Don't worry. Now they have Fat Wreck, right? It's going to. I don't know if that's finished or not. But so yeah, I would have heard the first couple of songs there. I think there were 2 songs there, and there was a DVD with it too. And I think they had a video or 2. There's definitely one video on there. It was just objects on like pastel backgrounds. It was very similar to that one Morellas Forest music video, just like things on a colored background. Like, okay, very 90s videos.
Basically a visualizer.
Yeah. And then that's probably I either would have just gotten Fallow and downloaded it, or maybe was more introduced through our friends because they were huge Weakerthans fans. And yeah, I probably heard those songs, met them, learned they loved the Weakerthans, remembered I liked those songs on those comps, and then went back and downloaded the albums. The Fallow and Left and Leaving would have been the 2. They were the 2 that I had listened to the most for the longest period of time. It took me a while to get to Reconstruction Site and Reunion Tour. I was just like stuck on those first 2. They were just so perfect that like I was not ready to move on to the 3rd and 4th albums for a very long period.
I had just Fallow. I feel like I had just Fallow for like 2 years. I was just like, and listening to it a lot. Mm-hmm. So I was like, people don't like Fallow as much.
No.
And I guess I understand that if you absorbed all of the Weakerthans, either you progressed with the band or you came to them after the fact and you just like was like, oh, I'm going to listen to their 4 records because they only have 4 records and it's really easy to do.
Yeah.
I can see why Fallow would not be on the same level as the other 3. But man, like it was so good. And I just spent so much time with that one record that I'm like, it's 5 stars. It's just as good as everything else.
Yeah. See, I'm the same way. I think I spent so much time with Fallow and Left and Leaving that I love them. I actually love them more than the second 2, just because I spent so much more time with them. But I think they're all of equal level of quality, So yeah, I'm a big like Fallow's Amazing fan, whereas I think a lot of people aren't because their introduction was probably this album.
Why don't you ever want to play? I'm tired of this piece of string. You sleep as much as I do now, and you don't eat much of anything. I don't know who you're talking to. I made a search through every room, but all I found was dust that moved in shadows of the afternoon. And listen, about those bitter songs you sing, they're not helping anything. They won't make you strong. So we should.
So let's do a little backstory. So this band was initially formed by John K. Samson after his time in the skate punk, melodic hardcore, now just a metal band. I don't know how you describe them, but Propagandhi. He had quit the band following the second Propagandhi album. He wanted to start a publishing company, like that was what he wanted to do next, and also focus on, his own songwriting. If you listen to those first two Propagandhi records and you hear the John K. Samson songs on it, you go, this guy doesn't fit in these bands. This guy should be in something else. And it's noticeable whenever you listen to Aside, the Propagandhi version versus the Weakerthans version. Very clearly, this guy's not supposed to be here. But John P. Sutton and Jason Tate had played together in another band called Red Fisher in Winnipeg. And they joined up with John, and that is the Weakerthans. The Weakerthans' first lineup is a three-piece. The idea of the Weakerthans was to focus more on melodic and introspective type music than what Propagandhi was doing, which was, stick the fucking flag up your fucking ass.
Yeah.
Not very introspective, but...
Yeah. Which makes the early Propagandhi stuff a little more charming when you remember that John Kay was in the band, the guy who was born wearing a cardigan.
Yeah. He quit the band to be a publisher.
Yeah.
So as a three-piece, they released their debut album Fallow in 1997, which had rave reviews at the time. See, you got to remember that. People at the time loved it.
Yeah.
Because it was so different.
Because it's great.
Yeah, it's a fucking awesome record. Yeah. I think the only people who don't like Fallow are the ones who came late to the party. I think that's really what it is.
We came late to the party. We just started at the beginning like you're supposed to.
You go in order. It's like movies and books.
There's 4 records. It's not... You just start at the beginning.
Yeah.
It's not like a artist that's been around for 40 years and you're like, just pick the most popular one to start.
Yeah. They then add their second guitarist, Stephen Carroll, to the band. He was from another band in Winnipeg called Painted Thin, and they released Left and Leaving in 2000. And so they released both those records on G7, which was the Propagandhi record label that they formed together. And then Subcity released Left and Leaving in the US. And so their deals were up with Subcity, and they were looking for somewhere else to put out records. At the time, they were asked, why did they change labels? And they went with Epitaph Records because they said back then they had like 5 different distributors whenever they were putting out the first 2 records. And it was just getting too difficult to maintain, like, all right, who still owes us money? Where are we shipping these off to? Who's getting what? It was a headache to deal with 5 different distros. And so they're like, if we go with Epitaph, they do it all in-house. It's all them. We don't have to worry about different avenues of where our music is being distributed. So in 2003, Epitaph Records also released Indestructible by Rancid, Blackout by the Dropkick Murphys, Anchors Away by the Bouncing Souls, From the Ashes by Pennywise, Plague Soundscapes by The Locust, Into the Valley of Death by Death by Stereo, Stories and Alibis by Matchbook Romance, Thick Freakness by The Black Keys, Streetcore by Joe Strummer and the Mescaleros, and Sans Souci by Frenzel Rom. A lot of this stuff was put out on like Hellcat and Fat Possum. I was so surprised. There were multiple Fat Possum records that were also tagged as Epitaph Records. My guess is Fat Possum was also being distributed by Epitaph at that time. So that's how you get a Black Keys record on your Discogs page now. But yeah, with this record, they spent more time on pre-production than they had on their previous records. They wrote it in a more collaborative way, definitely taking, more from each other. There was one interview I read where they were like, so nobody else ever writes lyrics for the band. You write them all yourself. He's like, yep, that's the one area where I'm like, this is mine. I am the lyricist of this band, which makes sense. It started as his project. The quality of the production is noticeably a little stronger. In an interview, Samson chalked that up to the mixer, Adam Casper. He's like, we recorded it basically the same way we record all of our records, but we had him mix it. And I think that's where people were really into the production on this record. And I guess out of the 4 records, I mean, at least the first 2 records, there is a noticeable step up in production quality on this album, despite basically having the same producer on all the records and engineers. But the album is somewhat of a concept album, kind of about death and grief and mortality. There's a running theme throughout the record. The songs Manifest, Hospital Vespers, and Past Due. They are all the songs on the track listing that have the parentheses around them, and they are all part of a theme of someone who has a terminal illness in a hospital and living in a hospital. And then there's even the song, which song is it? That's about being in a hospital. Not sure. Maybe I'm thinking of something off Reunion Tour. But yeah, a little bit of a concept record of sorts. But all right, so revisiting it, what did you think of it?
I mean, I love it. I love all 4 of the Weakerthans records. I knew easily going into it that I'm like, well, I know every song on here. I know this record beginning to end really well. There's not going to be any real surprises, so it's just kind of a case of where does this one hit me right now? So I guess I kind of had my ears tuned to this record, though, with maybe the hope or the expectation to hear something different because it was so familiar. I wanted to try to listen to it maybe a little deeper. And I've dabbled in, I've listened to songs from this record recently, just kind of drawing on the production of this record. It's interesting you mentioned the production being a significant change on this record, which I've recognized it before, and I would say that it's the last 2 are the shinier, prettier Weakerthans records that sound a little smoother and have a little more arrangement to them and more experimentation. So I've kind of listened to some of it recently with that mindset, but I tried to listen to the whole record as best as I could as if I'd never heard it before, which obviously, is not possible because I know I'm singing along with it immediately. But I also kind of had it, I've listened to Reunion Tour recently in the past year, and so I was maybe comparing it a little bit to that record while I was listening to it, and also trying to think about, I say all of their records are 5 stars. Now, I could probably rank them, but could I rank them? Was something that I was kind of chewing on while I was listening to it too. It was do each of the 4 Weakerthans records offer something unique? Is there something specific to each one that makes it different enough from the others that makes it ultimately uncomparable? Makes them all uncomparable. They're all delicious fruit, but they're all different kinds. Not all Weakerthans records are apples.
Yeah.
So
my ranking is more based on what I spend more time with. Is really how I rank them.
Yeah.
But yeah, they all each offer something different.
And I guess if you pushed me to say what's my favorite Weakerthans record, I think ultimately the most appropriate to the spirit of the Weakerthans and John K. Sampson as a writer would be to pick the one that has the most sentimental importance to me, and that'd be Fallow.
Yeah.
For all of its whatever flaws that other people assign to it, I think it's a great record, and I love it. And there's a reason I was perfectly content with that one for 2 years. I think every Weakerthans record as much as I say they're 5 stars, they all have just a tiny little element to them that I don't quite care for. Which there's something about the Weakerthans. There's something about them that I don't quite like, despite loving them. You know what I mean? It's the humanistic. I think it's one of the things that makes them so great as a band is that they're flawed. They're not really perfect if you actually put them under a microscope. They're human beings, and they have little irks, and it's like family. Of course I love them, but they do these things that kind of annoy me. And I think the Weakerthans have always done something that slightly annoys me. And I think that's, I don't know, part of the beauty of the band and like part of the charm of the band. Like we make the jokes, like that's the thing, we make the jokes about how soft they are. Like they're soft. It's a weenie band. Like they're not, they feel like there's something to poke fun at. So I think my takeaway from this record, and I guess like what I ended up maybe spending the most time on thinking about while I was listening to this record is what's the thing I don't like about the Weakerthans on this album? Because I think I could say Reunion Tour, the thing I maybe don't like about that record is that it's a little too experimental.
Reunion Tour is my least favorite album by them. It's the one I spend the least amount of time with. And it doesn't have nearly as many of like the songs that I go back to specifically.
Yeah.
It's a good record, but yeah, it's definitely my least favorite.
I think like Fallow, I might say it's a little too earnest is kind of its flaw, its character trait. Left in Leaving, maybe it's just too long-winded. It's probably the longest record.
That one's my favorite. Left in Leaving is the one I go to the most. And I don't even notice the length on that record. I know it is pretty long. It is definitely one of their like longer albums, but I don't know. I never notice it when I'm listening to it.
It's the one Weakerthans record to me that I think has the most air of pretension to it. So this one, Reconstruction Site, it's a pretty balanced record. There's a little bit of pretension with the parentheses songs. There's a little bit of experimentation. There's a little earnesty. But I think some of the things that I came away with too, like the Weakerthans have I guess I'll say this. Maybe the flaw with Reconstruction Site is it's exactly the record that most people would say is their best.
Yeah, I mean, it is.
It's very buttoned down. It's very like it nails all of the Weakerthans things that they do. And the lyrics are all very John Kay. And I think that something that the Weakerthans gets a lot of praise for is John Kay's writing. I think he's a great writer. I think he's a really, really good writer. But I wouldn't call him my favorite lyricist. I think he's a really good songwriter, and I think he has a lot of really interesting imagery. He uses a lot of concrete language. He elevates mundanity, and I think, the assessment of him as the most empathetic songwriter or whatever, like, I don't totally agree with, but empathy is very core to his writing. But I think there's always been something about him, and I kind of realized it in listening to this record, is a lot of the time he explains the themes of the lyrics too much in the text. The thing that I don't like about John Kay as a writer is he doesn't leave enough subtext. And I think he does a lot of like shifting, like too many metaphors within one song. I think he's great at metaphor, but I think he just makes too many metaphors and everything, and then also like explains the metaphors. And I'm like, John, we're smarter than this.
I don't know. I've never really felt that way at all about any of his lyrics. I actually think I prefer his lyrics to most other songwriters. I like how concrete he is. I like how he's not very abstract with his writing. I think it's my dumb brain. Like I don't like really abstract lyrics. I just don't get much out of them. Yeah, that's why I like people like John Kay. Why I like Blake Schwarzenbach, who like He probably thinks he's more abstract than he actually is. He's got
Well,
some pretty concrete lyrics in there.
Like Blake, see, that's the thing, is like there's a difference between Blake and John Kay, and those are the two that people compare the most in your like poet laureate punk songwriters.
Yeah.
And I prefer Blake over John Kay. And I think I realized in listening to this record why I prefer Blake to John Kay. John Kay is a smart guy who knows he's a smart guy, and he has a lot of empathy for people, but he's always outside. Blake Schwarzenbach is a smart guy who thinks he's smarter than he is and is often very stupid. And there's something that I can get into with Blake of just being like dumb and not realizing it and just kind of living it. And that's the difference with Jawbreaker songs and Weakerthans songs is I can live a Jawbreaker song. There's not as many Weakerthans songs that I live. And I don't think it's a good thing to live Jawbreaker songs, but it's just it's, human life. Like you make poor decisions and you are pessimistic and petty at times. And John Kay is someone who I feel like tries to work out all of his pessimism and pettiness and make them go away. I don't know. Anyway, we hyper analyzing Weakerthans lyrics. But there's just like a little bit of smarm to John Kay that I'm like, I can't quite get along with.
He's a little more twee. Actually,
Yeah.
he's much more twee than Blake is. Blake's not twee. Blake's not twee at all.
No.
He's very Wes Anderson-y
Yeah.
with his lyric writing.
And at his most Wes Anderson, our retired explorer dines with Michael Foucault in Paris 1961. I'm like, really? That's my one of my least favorite, lyrically, one of my least favorite Weakerthans songs.
I'd agree. Lyrically, it is one of my least favorite as well. It does. It feels like, oh yeah, that's a Wes Anderson short that he made before the French Dispatch or whatever that movie was called.
Yeah.
It feels very much like, like a B-side to Life Aquatic.
Yeah.
The subplot where the time Steve Zissou went to the Antarctic. Yeah.
Late afternoon, another day is nearly done. A darker gray is breaking through a lighter one. 1,000 sharpened elbows in the underground. That hollow, hurried sound of feet on polished floor. And in the dollar store, the clerk is closing up and counting loonies, trying not to say, I hate Winnipeg. The driver checks the mirror 7 minutes late. The crowded rider's restlessness enunciates. Guess who sucked? The Jets were lousy anyway. The same route every day. And in the turning lane, someone stalled again. He's talking to himself and hears the price of gas repeat his phrase. I hate Winnipeg.
Yeah, that one is, Dines with Michel Foucault in Paris, 1961. Just, it's like I think it's specifically like, it's like somebody is the main character of the song is like a Shackleton fan. It's like, yeah. It's got a great chorus though.
Yeah.
Really good hook, but like conceptually, lyrically, it is one that I was like, huh. I remember the band Sprainerd covered this song. Because it was like a tribute to he was like a booker, I believe, in like Philadelphia who like passed away in like a car accident. But they were like, we chose this song to cover because it was one of his favorite songs. And I remember thinking, this one's his favorite? Like, I'm criticizing a dead guy. Like, this is your favorite Weakerthans song? No way. I remember being really annoyed by that. Like,
I think it's the comment allez-vous ce soir, je suis comme si comme ça. Yes, a penguin taught me French back in Antarctica. It's the penguin taught me French line. It takes me out entirely. I'm like, you lost me. Now I don't care about this. I'm not invested in this Antarctic explorer story anymore. You made a talking penguin.
That's true. That does seem sillier than you normally get from from John.
I say that the song is immediately after A Plea from a Cat Named Virtute, sorry.
Yeah.
Which is a song sung from the perspective of his cat, but it's like, all right, well, I have a cat, and I'm an often depressed man. So that's at least I can live this.
That one's relatable.
That's one of the Virtute songs are the most lived experience of Weakerthans songs, common lived experiences that I can find. Can't listen to these songs without those Virtute songs without getting choked up.
Oh
anymore.
Yeah, I listened to that one yesterday when I was making my notes, and my note in it is, God damn it, John. That song, man. Woo. Well, and it's also worse too, knowing the full trilogy of songs. It's just like, God. There was not a real Virtute though. It's like a composite of.
It's a lie.
It's a lie song. I did read in a review that was like, and John sadly has broken all of our hearts by admitting that these are a composite of multiple cats he's known throughout his life, and it works though. He's a good storyteller, so it works.
Yeah.
Works too goddamn well.
It probably varies depending on what line did you choke on?
Oh, okay. Let me see.
This time.
Because it varies depending on what mood you're in when you listen to. Let me pull up the exact lyrics to this song.
I think for me, it was let your losses dangle off the sharp edge of a century. Talk about the weather or how the weather used to be.
Let's see. I mean, mine's the cheap one. It's the one where like the music cuts, just trims down, and the I'll lie down and lick the sorrow from your skin, scratch the terror, and begin to believe you're strong.
Yeah.
God, now, as I'm saying that, God damn. And like, that's the magic of John K. Samson's lyrics. That the fact that I can just read a lyric to a song and like get like chills and tears welling in my eyes, just God damn. That's it. Is the Virtute songs his crowning achievement as a songwriter? Like, is it his most effective songwriting? Or is it just because we're cat owners?
Yeah.
And we feel it more than Garage Sale Saturday. Coffee cups I stole from all night restaurants,
I mean, I think when he sings about, I mean, like I kind of, maybe like curled my lip a little bit at the parentheses songs on this record, but like Hospital Vespers is incredible. I mean, lyrically, the lyric on this record, listening to it this time, that I like actually like broke and sobbed for a minute.
Oh God.
was the before the nurses came, took you away, I stood there on a chair and watched you pray.
That's Hospital Vespers.
Yeah, where he's, hey, can you help me? I can't reach it. Pointed at the camera on the ceiling. I climbed up and blocked it so they couldn't see. Turned to find you out of bed and kneeling. That was the turn to find you out of bed and kneeling. I was just like,
I feel like there was something in benediction that I also kind of like hit on. I'm trying to think of which one it was though. Maybe not. Yeah, that's the thing. Like, these lyrics, I know you were criticizing them to start with, but they affect me much more in a way than most other people's lyrics do. I mean, honestly, The Reason is like, that's a love song to someone who, rolls their eyes at like, lovey-dovey type stuff, and that honestly feels like my wife. Like the lines about, you might roll your eyes at this, but I'm so glad that you exist. Like, yes, she would roll her eyes if I were to say that line to her. Like,
I think John K. Samson can be wordy, and I think that I guess what the bigger point I'm getting at is that I think maybe sometimes, I don't know if he's doubting himself in his efficacy, or if he's unsure if the audience will understand what he's saying, or if he just needs to fill space, which could very practically be the case, because in songs you kind of have to fill space. But
that is one of the most unsung elements of songwriting that people really don't like to accept. They really hate the idea of, well, I just needed a word that fit.
Yeah,
takes the magic out of it.
I gotta have another verse because the song calls for it, But I think John Kay can write, and what I love about him as a writer, and like he can write such incredibly efficient lines. Like he can just say, "Pulled along in the tender grip of watches and ellipses," and you think that you gotta like piece together what the puzzle of what he's saying, and it's the tender grip of watches and ellipses. Like he's got phrases in, trying to think of some of the songs on this record specifically. I mean, even just half of the refrain, the first refrain of A New Name for Everything, like so long past due, says so much in so few words. Dot and dash our days, I think is a great phrase. He has so many just little, it'll be one phrase in a whole verse or a chorus, and I'm just like, man, that's good. God damn, that's good. How do you write that? And it's that little phrase carries all of it. It says everything that I need that verse or that chorus to say. And like, obviously you just gotta fit the, structure of the song and have more words. But I'm just like, he does a lot with a little, and that's his strongest point. But then he also does a lot. And I think that's what loses me, is there's too much extra. And it's not to say that I don't think he's one of my favorite lyricists, but it keeps him from that top spot. And it's not to say that you can't write, extremely wordy songs. Bruce Springsteen, famously wrote incredibly wordy songs, and I think they're great, but different styles of writing. But I'm always a fan of the really efficient, like, it's what it's one of the things that I get out of so much of country music, where it's like, this song has one great line, but it's a great line.
One Great City is one for me that really stands out too, because it's a very each verse is like a different person in Winnipeg. In the in the dollar store, the clerk is closing up and counting loonies, trying not to say I hate Winnipeg. Just, you could see it, like, it's so concrete, you can see it. The crowded riders' restlessness enunciates the guess who sucked. The Jets were lousy anyway. Jets are doing great this season, actually. They're like 13-1, so as of this recording. So the Jets are great right now. So not so prescient right now. But our golden business boy will watch the North End die and sing I love this town. Then let his arcing wrecking ball proclaim I hate Winnipeg. Like, I love that song so much.
That song, I think, is one of his best written songs overall.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like it sets up the conceit and executes it. Like, it delivers on that, like, just the shifting narrative. Like, you're getting these different narratives, and it comes to this last perspective and punctuates it. Like, that's a great song. I mean, it's super catchy, really memorable, has a great sense of place, which is something I love. I love a sense of place in songwriting. That's one of the better songs I think he's ever written, just from a technical standpoint.
Yeah. I made a meme one time, and I posted it. It was a photo of 3 professional wrestlers, all from Winnipeg. Kenny Omega, Chris Jericho, and Don Callis. They were in a photo together, and I just put the text over it, I hate Winnipeg, and I posted it in a Weakerthans Facebook group, and I was like, I don't know how many wrestling fans are in here, and then every single wrestling fan in that group found it and was like, holy shit, this is so good. So like, I've always loved this song. It feels like the opening theme to a TV show, which, now that I think about it, one of the songs on this record is the theme song to a TV show, like a Canadian TV show that was like, oh, this show was huge in Canada, but nobody's seen it in the US. Let's see. I bet if you got Acorn TV, you could probably watch it. Reconstruction Site. It is. One Great City serves as the theme song for the Canadian television comedy drama Less Than Kind. Less Than Kind ran from 2008 to 2013. It's a Canadian television comedy drama series that stars Jesse Camacho, as Sheldon Bletcher, a teenager growing up in a loving but dysfunctional Jewish family in Winnipeg. I don't know any of the other names. I don't know the names of anyone in this show. Like, never heard of it. It had no US crossover whatsoever. Is this? No, this is not the album. There's another Weakerthans song that became like the theme song for a podcast that was like really popular, but Sun in an Empty Room was the theme song for the Gimlet Media podcast Heavyweight, a show I never listened to. But yeah, this, like, as far as standout tracks on here, stuff that I think stands out from their catalog in general, I do think The Reasons, Plea from a Cat, Name Virtute, A New Name for Everything, One Great City. Those feel like the really standout tracks on this record. Psalms for the Elks Lodge, Last Call. Like, those all feel like very standout songs on the record and in their greater discography.
Yeah, I don't know. I think my favorite songs, I think Psalm for the Elks Lodge, Last Call is like also a pretty sneaky good song.
Yeah.
Before we say good night. That outro. Oh, man. I really like Time's Arrow. I really like A New Name for Everything is...
Oh, yeah.
A New Name for Everything is probably my favorite or one of my favorite, like top 3 Weakerthans songs of all time. The Prescience of Dawn is great.
There are songs on here that I have always heard, but they never really stood out to me until I listened to it. Time's Arrow stood out. Uncorrected Proof stood out to me as like, whoa, that's like one of like the harder rocking songs. Prescience of Dawn was, it hit me a little harder this time around than the original, multiple, previous listenings. New Name for Everything's great. It's like super twangy. I really love like the country twang on Weakerthans songs that, that utilize it.
Yeah. I love that steel guitar lick at the beginning. The little squeak it makes. Yeah, we spent so much time talking about the lyrics. I think also that the music is great in the Weakerthans. I think the music in the Weakerthans probably takes a little bit too much of a backseat in how much the way that people talk about the band, because the lyrics are very front and center and very important. But I think there's a good interplay between the lyrics and the music. I think that there's good like song structure that happens like in how it relates to the music, and you get the lyrics, and you get those really dynamic elements that can help really punch the important things. But I think they're good guitar players. I think they're not showy, they're not writing big guitar solos or anything, but there's interesting lead guitar parts, and like they like to incorporate other elements, and I think they do it really well. Because as good as the lyrics are, if the music wasn't as good as it is, I don't know that I would have spent so much time absorbing the words.
Right.
And if, I think the reason I come back to those John Kay solo records, they're really good. I think they're well written, but I don't come back to them the way that I come back to Weakerthans songs, because the music is just not quite as good. There really is something to what everyone else in the band is doing.
I think Winter Weed is the stronger album because it does actually feature 2 of the Weakerthans on the record. I think it's better than Provincial, and it does feel more like a Weakerthans record. But yeah, it's not quite the same. I've got some reviews and some quotes that I pulled out here that we can run through kind of quickly. They did wind up touring with the Constantines, Lucero, Murder by Death, and a band called Roy throughout the next year or two. And I think when I hear about my friends when they first saw the Weakerthans, it was with Lucero. I think they came through here.
Man,
talk about a show, man. God, I love. See, Lucero is very much in the same sense, like a very concrete. Ben Nichols is a very concrete lyricist, and he's another guy that I just really like his lyrics. They're not really about anything, and he openly admits they're not really about. I think the way he writes his songs is just setting up scenes. I think there's a reason why his brother's a director, because they're just kind of good with imagining scenarios. But yeah, imagine that show. Whew, that'd be so good.
See, and I prefer Ben Nichols as a songwriter over John Kay. Like, I know the songs aren't really about anything, but he writes better characters. Like John Kay, great phrases and images, great sense of place. Ben Nichols, also great phrases, great characters, great sense of place. I don't know. That's someone who checks more boxes of what I look for in a lyricist.
They toured for about a year and a half in support of this record. John hates touring. He has said, I don't know if that's in recent years he hates touring, but they toured a lot, I think, and especially during this era of the band. And he said that I found an interview in 2005 where he said, we were in the States on election day in 2004. He said, even in the couple weeks after that, we were touring in the Midwest, and it seemed that the nation I understand to be the United States, a progressive, wonderful, active, thoughtful, open people, were in mourning and were defeated. I think that's true to a certain extent. I think there's lots of talk of trying to heal the wounds and not be divisive. But I think the opposite needs to be true. This is the time to be divisive. And in the next few years, it's our jobs as progressives to stand up for what we believe in. And when I read that, I was like, God damn it, John. He's talking about the 2004 election where Bush won the second time, and people were defeated after that. But then the fact that we're doing this like a week after the election, and the part about we need to not be divisive, and then he turns around and says, yes, we do need to be divisive. I was like, God, that's why you guys were right. You know, the propaganda family tree, they're more right than wrong when it comes to this kind of stuff.
Yeah, because you have to have actual virtues.
Yeah. I just thought that was a very interesting, very timely quote from 20 years ago. God. The record was very positively reviewed. It became their best-selling record to date. And I think that's partly why this record is one of the ones people go to first from them. It's because it's the one that got the widest distribution. It sold really well. It did really well in Canada. AllMusic gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. Pitchfork gave it a 5.6 out of 10 because this is during the period where Pitchfork hated everything. Yeah. And like they did a review for the Pinback album that came out around this time period too, and it was like a garbage fucking review that just complained about the show that the person went to who wrote the article and then left early. I was like, what is the point of this article? You know, it's just terrible. And the Pitchfork article for this record, it's bad. It's really bad. But there's one part of it that I just really, really hate. He goes on for a really long time about how the album cover is better than the music on the record because it's like some famous Canadian artist, and like this artist is so much more creative and inventive than anything on this record. And like
it's Marcel Dezama. I'm not familiar with their work outside of album covers, but they did they did 2 They Might Be Giants album covers. They did Guero by Beck. They did a Sufjan record cover from 2017, and they did a Shame. They did a couple of covers for Shame.
Weird.
They did their 2023 album.
But there's one specific line that really pissed me off. It said that Reconstruction Site, the title track sounds like Smash Mouth. And I was just like, what the fuck are you talking about? What Smash Mouth ever sounds anything like that song? Some syncopated drumming, I think, is really the thing that they're pointing out, because nothing on that song sounds remotely close to Smash Mouth. I wish Smash Mouth sounded like the Weakerthans.
It sounds like Sheryl Crow.
Yeah.
More than it sounds like Smash Mouth. It sounds like Wallflowers.
Yeah. And then I got a quote from Jam Showbiz, which was like a Canadian site, that said it's their first for their influential and respected indie label Epitaph. In a nice bit of synchronicity, it's also their most inspired, coherent, adventurous, engrossing, and fully realized work. A disc that clearly establishes the reed-thin, reedy voiced Samson as the most gifted and creative songwriter this city has produced in a generation. A disc that finds the other talented members of the Weakerthans, guitarist, keyboardist Stephen Carroll, bassist John P. Sutton, and drummer percussionist Jason Tate, matching him in stride for stride with their bold and expressive musical contributions. Reed thin, reedy voice is a little redundant there. We use reed twice.
Yeah.
But it's a Winnipeg paper that wrote about it. And apparently like Winnipeg itself is like known for being like an art city and a really strong like musical center place. So part of One Great City's lyrics, he has this like, he said he loves Winnipeg. He's from Winnipeg. He lives there. He's probably not going to move. And that he thinks that after touring around the country that all cities are basically the same, so he's like, you just kind of make of what you have wherever you are. But he says like an anti-boosterism. Like he's like, I wanted to write a song that was like, just bring it down just a peg. Like I like this city, but I'm not going to, write songs about how great it is. He's like, but it's a great art city and lots of bands have come out of there. And I'm sure we wouldn't know them. They live in Canada. But yeah, they appeared on the Earshot National Top 50 chart due to significant airplay on Canadian radio. They won Outstanding Independent Album at the 2004 Western Canadian Music Awards. John also won Outstanding Songwriter at that year's awards. They were nominated for the Alternative Album of the Year for the Junos, which the Junos is like the Canadian Grammys. The Reasons was nominated for Best Video at the Junos, which I watched the video for that. It's like, it's a silly video, way sillier than you'd expect, I guess, from them. But this is Sutton's final album with the band. He leaves after this record, and he's replaced by Greg Smith. They put out Reunion Tour in 2007. They go on break in 2009, and the John K. Samson releases a series of 7 inches and the Provincial album in 2010. They do that album with Jim Bryson in 2010, where the Weakerthans are the backing band and Jim Bryson is the singer. He's like a Canadian singer-songwriter. I remember asking, I was like, is that any good? And my friend's like, no, not really. It's just like, it's the Weakerthans music with somebody else singing, and it just doesn't work the same. And then they go on hiatus. Tate says in 2015 that the Weakerthans have broken up. And I remember when that came out. They now call themselves Cryogenically Frozen. So they consider it a hiatus, not a full breakup. My understanding is, and this is just more based on like chatter at the time, that Stephen Carroll's the holdout. He's the one who kind of doesn't want to do it right now because Tate and Smith both, they're on winter wheat, and John hates touring too, so that's part of it.
Yeah,
that's probably why there's no like big push for them to like do anything as a band right now, because the expectation would probably be to tour alongside of it. Because I think any label they were going to take them on would hope they would tour too to promote it, and they would probably feel obligated to tour to promote it. But I don't know, do some one-offs.
Yeah. Oh, that reminds me, the day that they announced that they were breaking up or that they were done, I remember that day because I then proceeded to listen to all 4 Weakerthans records in one sitting.
Trying to drown yourself in Weakerthans.
So I remember at one point, it was probably like halfway through like the 4th record, I was just like, I went outside. Like I got up from my desk and I just went outside and just like stood there for like 10 minutes. It's like, this was a mistake. Shouldn't have done this. I mean,
they didn't have new music for like a long time, so it really shouldn't have been that. I think everyone kind of assumed they were like done or just choosing not to be active. But I guess whenever he said it out loud, that was the part where everybody was like, what? John had done his solo records already. They did that one record with Jim Bryson, but they hadn't done one as a band since 2007, like 8 years between records. But yeah, I do remember it being like, what? You can't be done. Just kind of refusing to accept reality. But, the fact that they don't really consider themselves fully broken up, well, neither does Fugazi. So, and that's never happening.
Yeah, and we know what the odds of that are.
If it happens, they're not going to tell anybody it's happening. They'll play at that, like, show in the park thing that they do in DC, like, where, like, Discord bands play all the time. And, the Evens will sometimes go play.
And they can only do it, like, they would only be able to ever agree to doing that if they trusted whoever was putting it on to not leak it that they were going to be there. Because Fugazi would, I'm sure they were like, if anyone finds out we're doing this, we're not doing it.
Yeah. The only way it's happening is if there's a Corky show, and who's not in Corky? Is it Guy? Oh, it's just Ian. It's Ian and Joe. So
Ian
like
and Joe is the Corky. Yeah.
You have to get Brendan and it. So it would be like Corky played a show, and then Guy and Brendan like came up and played a song. That's the closest we're ever gonna get to a real Fugazi reunion, I think. Because they don't want to sell tickets for more than a certain dollar amount, and I don't think they can exist in the modern musical landscape without charging a certain amount. Only doing house shows around the country, not going to work. But
I mean, just the flood of people,
yeah,
coming to it would just be unsafe.
Yeah. I think there's just no feasible way to do it with unless they sold out their own, beliefs. That'd be the only way you could actually get it done in a way that was safe. You're right. Safe seems to be like the only way to do it, because otherwise they're going to get fucking Bikini killed. Remember when they, reunited and like the tickets for that thing sold out instantaneously by bots and, second sellers and all that. Yeah. Yeah. There's no way to do Fugazi the right way. So they should just never do it. Weakerthans, though, on the other hand, I feel like you can do just fine.
The Weakerthans would be.
So that's my prediction. We'll see the Weakerthans before Fugazi. Yeah. I mean, I'd be happy with just seeing John K. because I think he just plays Weakerthans songs anyway, too, in his sets. So, but yeah, that's kind of all I have written down here in my notes. Let's give it a rating and get out of here. Is it truly a 5-star record for you?
Yeah, it's 5 stars. I'm not changing my ratings. I'm finding minuscule quibbles with the Weakerthans. It's like nothing substantive. It's just like I'd have done that differently.
A little too wordy on that stanza there. Yeah, I give this one, because I actually have a hierarchy of Weakerthans albums, I'm not going to give it 5. I'm going to give it a 4.75. I do think the other records are actually better. And I mean, I guess I could use the Dave Meltzer Wrestling Observer ratings and say this is a 5, but like Fallow and Left and Leaving are 6s. I could do that. But if I have a hard line, nothing's allowed to go past 5. Fine. Those get 5s. This gets a 4.75. So that's where I'm at. I don't break my scale, I guess is the difference between me and Dave Meltzer. But there's many differences. But he makes a living writing about wrestling. I make dozens of dollars. But I think that'll do it. So thank you all so much for listening. You can follow us on all social media at PunkLottoPod. I guess people have decided to use Threads and Blue Sky more. So cool. Oh, we're there too, And punklotopod@gmail.com. Our voicemail line 202-688-PUNK. Get those voicemails ready for the best albums of 2024. We will play your voicemails. If you give us your list of your favorite albums of the year, we'll play it. So thank you all so much, and we'll talk to you next time.
To order Punk, call the number on your screen. Rush delivery is available. Remember, this special offer is not sold in stores.